Welcome to the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. Today we have Dialed Health's Teel with us. Derek, the last time we did a strength training episode, it got like hundreds of thousands of views. It was one of the most popular podcast episodes of the year, probably since then, even overall, one of our most popular episodes. Stoked to have you back.
Thanks for having me. It's crazy. It's been a couple years now already, but I got some awesome feedback from that episode. And most importantly, I think it helped a lot of people.
Yep, we're going to talk about strength training for cyclists. That's what Derek does. Derek's background, you can go find him at Dialed Health on Instagram. Derek is a cyclist just like you listening to this, who's also, been through years of strength training within gym environments, and then also was a professional downhill mountain biker, has also raced endurance events all around the world. Incredible human, great story, and somebody that you should follow if you're listening to this podcast. And today we're going to go full into your recommendations for cyclists for strength training. It's the off season. It's when a lot of cyclists think about this. But on that specific topic, we're going to kind of talk about maybe some ways that athletes are doing it wrong and ways that your knowledge has evolved over the years. Mm-hmm. Before we do any of that, I want to go into an interesting study. There's kind of like 3 studies that have really caught my eye over the past 6 months to a year on strength training. We'll kind of reference them throughout this, and I'll link them down below. But here's the first study. It's really interesting. It says strength training among professional UCI road cyclists, practices, challenges, and rationales. And this is by, pardon the pronunciation, Vikestad et al. 2025. This is a situation where it's an observational study, or basically like they send out a questionnaire, they get information back, and then they break down that data. So this isn't something where they actually had some sort of like control experiment or anything else. This is just them publishing this data, then using statistics to be able to draw conclusions from the data. They sent a questionnaire to 624 pro road cyclists. Interestingly, they said they did it through Instagram DM.
I saw that, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. 147 athletes responded. 88 of them male, 59 of them female. And it points through here, we'll kind of share, because there's interesting splits, Derek. Like males and their perspectives or practices with strength training were surprisingly different in some cases to what females did. And I thought that would be interesting to cover too. So notable results. They sent out this questionnaire, athletes filled it out, then they got all the data, and some notable results from this. On average, pros did 2 strength training sessions per week during the off season and pre-seasons, and only 1 session during the race season. Women, now these are from athletes, keep in mind, this is 147 athletes. So this does not, they sent this out to 624 pro road cyclists, and there are more than 624 pro road cyclists in the world too. So this is not comprehensive. This is a sample, and then we're going to extrapolate from here. So I want to make sure that's understood. Some interesting things though, women did more strength training than men. So during the off season or the pre-season, consider those one and the same for now, 85% of males did it, while 97% of the females that responded did it. For the race season, 36% of males did it, while 66% of the females still strength trained through the race season, which is quite interesting. Really interesting. They're also there's some interesting breakdowns here on the where they target for core, lower body, or upper body for when they're training. 66% of the males did core, 75% of the females did core. When we get to lower body, 85% of the men did lower body strength training, while 97% of the women did lower body strength training. Upper body strength training, only 8% of the men did it, while 27% of the women did it. So kudos to the women here, just crushing the dudes, in my opinion, here with doing more strength training and also doing upper body. Can we just start on that topic really quick? And this is just a small thing. There's this concept, Derek, that the reason that you strength train is because you want to increase your max sprint. So you just train lower body and that's it. And maybe you train core a little bit, but nobody wants to train upper body. Should cyclists train upper body with strength training?
You have handlebars for a reason. Your upper body has a lot to do with how well you can control your power output and your overall stability on the bike. There's no disputing that. And this isn't just for bike handling. This is for force production on the pedals. And so not doing any upper body strength training, for one, you're putting yourself more at risk for some type of chronic muscle impingement or some type of problem that could prevent you from being as comfortable as possible on the bike. This could be neck pain, this could be wrist pain, this could be numbness in your hands. All of these things can be drastically reduced as far as a risk goes just by doing some very moderate upper body strength training. Things like your grip strength that help your handling and your fatigue resistance. So there is a ton of value in it that doesn't directly translate to force production on the pedals, but it helps with that process, along with the fact that you're just going to feel like a better human off of the bike as well, which I think that we also forget when we get hyper focused on the pointiest end of our goals. So there's absolutely reason to do it, even if you're at the extreme end of cycling. Jonas Vingegaard, coming into the Tour de France, openly talked about how he gained weight coming into the Tour de France as a GC contender. And we all know that there was still one rider faster than him, but he smoked everybody else on these climbs and he gained weight coming into it. So there's obvious benefit to having more strength throughout your upper body, and the reduction of risk as far as long-term chronic injuries or even acute injuries down the line are reduced a lot. So it's more than worth your time. Absolutely.
Couldn't agree more. I'm glad that you bring that up, because the other side of it too is your power. Like, everyone fixates on a specific duration of power, whether you call that FTP, whether you call that your hour power, your 5-minute power, whatever the critical duration of power is for the sort of racing that you want to do. That's only relevant if you can produce that power, like on race day when it counts,
Yeah.
or on your big ride, whatever you have planned. Like that's the only time when that's truthfully like relevant, because otherwise, if you're in that race and you can't put out that power, then you're stuck. It's as if your training is all for naught. And the reason many times that you can't put out that power is, like you said, because you lack the structural stability and power and endurance to be able to actually hold the position you need and sustain that sort of power. It's not just legs. There's a whole lot more to it.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because when you look at, I think a lot of cyclists fear the fact that if they do strength training, particularly with their upper body, that they're going to increase muscle mass. And they actually asked them that question, and 48% of men and 41% of women, so women were less concerned with this, but not a massive difference, were concerned with the fact that if they do strength training, it might increase their muscle mass. And what they're really getting at there is, I don't think anybody's like, dang it, I'm going to look so much better. I don't think anybody's concerned with that. I think that cyclists are concerned with what you mentioned there with Jonas, like gaining weight. And that's like their big concern. But Derek, like, I personally speaking, I could only hope to be as somehow genetically blessed to be able to just touch some weights and then suddenly put on a huge amount of muscle mass. It's never worked for me that way. And I don't know how you feel about that fear, but I feel like it's invalid.
It's definitely invalid. And I can prove it through giving you an example of programming. For example, you can do upper body strength work and get the benefits of increasing strength and reducing those risks that I talked about earlier without putting on size. And let's just say worst case scenario, you do put on some muscle, unwanted weight, essentially. Let's say it's 2 pounds of muscle throughout your entire upper body. If you build it through functional exercise, it's not dead weight. I think that this is the thing that like Jonas Vingegaard is realizing in their coaches, is that just because you're heavier doesn't mean that it's dead weight. So that if you build strength that you can use functionally through the bike, or it prevents you from feeling less comfortable, then it's not just a loss. It actually can be a major benefit. And then you compare it with the actual increase of force production that you're going to get from strength training, and it starts to become worthwhile. So I think that's the biggest thing to consider, is that even if your worst case scenario is gaining a couple pounds of muscle in your upper body, if you build it through functional exercise, for example, a push-up, then it's going to translate to the bike and it is not dead weight. And to try and reduce any fear around strength training, I would say that the volume of strength training you have to do for upper body to specifically gain muscle is seriously like 6 times the amount that I would program in somebody's actual training program. Like, you might see in a dialed health training program, 4 sets of 10 reps of a bench press. Well, that could be the only upper body pushing motion that you do for that entire workout. The rest of it is deadlifts and core work and stability work and mobility. So even though you did 4 sets of 10 bench press, that was the only way you touched it throughout that session. If you had 4 sets of 10 reps of bench press in a bodybuilding program that was designed to build muscle, the entire session would be dedicated to those types of movements. So right after, you would do an incline dumbbell press, you would do chest cable flies, you would do tricep pushdowns. And the volume of the same muscle group keeps stacking and stacking and stacking. And you would have to do that more days per week and for months before you started noticing significant muscle gain. And by the way, muscle goes away a lot faster, unfortunately, than you build it. So if there was ever this point where for some reason you felt like you were gaining too much muscle, which again is very, very unlikely, you can just back off a little bit if that started to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The outliers in this scenario are people who come from other sports. For example, you're 40 years old, but you grew up playing football and you go into D1 in college and you have a ton of muscle mass from football. You might be the person that wants to touch on upper body strength enough to activate it and use it, but not really gain any muscle. There are these examples out there where you have someone who has a lot of strength training experience, needs to really pull it back. But even then, what I just talked about they would do in something like my program compared to what they did to build that muscle when they were in college, drastically different.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the fact that muscle is hard to maintain, and it's because it's a very expensive thing to keep around for your body.
Mhm.
Maintaining muscle mass requires a huge amount of resources because of the fact that when it works and it breaks down, it needs to be repaired. Fat doesn't do a whole lot of work, man. It just hangs out. Like, it's like,
Literally.
yeah, it's the dude that just, like, sleeps on your couch. It's like, it's not the sort of person that comes in, cleans up the whole place, takes care of it for you, and that's really what muscle is doing? So, it is
Yeah.
complex. It's a calorie burn, and we've talked about this also, and I think that a lot of cyclists have recognized this, that as you do increase, like, the amount of strength training that you're doing and you're using more muscle more frequently all throughout your body, also helps you burn a whole lot more calories. So there's a lot of great things to it.
Mhm.
They asked them about their motives on why they did strength training. 86% of men and 95% of women did it because they felt it improved cycling performance, which is great to see. Um, so they understand that. But 76% said it was to reduce injury risk, which I thought was pretty, like, that's interesting to see that that's high up there. Overall health, though, was 40% of the responders said that that was meaningful to them and a motivation. Increasing muscle mass was 22%. And then there are some other ones that tick down behind there. Notably, improving bone health was at 41% for men and 58% for female. I think that number should be much higher, in my opinion, if it
Mhm.
was like a truthfully well-informed group. But the reducing injury risk part, there's another study that I thought was interesting and relevant to this. It's called Beyond the Finish Line: The Epidemiology of Injury and Illness in Professional Cycling, Insights from a Year-Long Prospective Study by Fallon et al. And this is all this year. These studies have been published this year. This is a year-long perspective study through 2024 with 47 pro cyclists. So they basically say, hey, would you mind if we, like, asked you questions throughout the year and then you can just update us? And that's how those studies effectively work. They get some sort of information over a time course of on a certain group of people. In this case, 47 pro cyclists, 30 men, 17 women. They looked at how often accidents occurred and the nature of those accidents. It's quite interesting. They also look into illnesses as well. So if you're interested in this study, you can check it out down below. But here's why I'm bringing it up right now. They showed that in racing, there was roughly one accident for every 242 hours of racing for a cyclist.
Hmm.
Whereas in training, there was one accident for every 813 hours. So when you look at the percentage difference, that's a substantial difference when you look at racing. Now, Grant, I don't think these people were doing the lifetime Grand Prix because I think you'd see it a whole lot higher. I was thinking through the athletes that have, like, coached or that have crashed this year, and I'm like, a lot of them have crashed. So this is probably just roadside of things. But this brings up the fact that I think not enough cyclists, and this is probably the last thing that we'll do before we get into the learnings here. This is us making the case for strength training, but not enough cyclists prepare for the unfortunate and impending day that happens when you do crash. Like, it's going to happen. It's part of it. We fall off our bikes for one reason or another. And when that happens, it makes a massive difference when you have more strength. your body is able to just be way more durable than that. So
Mhm.
it's good to see that they're concerned with that. There's a lot of reasons to strength train, and really interesting study. I'm going to put that up there for everyone to go check out, and yeah, and hopefully you find something valuable for it. Derek, I want to step back though. I want to talk about strength training in general. Like, there's been this paradigm evolution over time where, like, at first it was like zero strength training. We just need to be a set of lungs and legs, and that's it. And if we can do that, then we'd be the fastest possible on the bike. Then that started to change a little bit. And then we got into like core training became a thing that people want to do, but they're like, just keep it to the off season. Don't do anything when you're actually riding the bike and racing. Just do it in the off season, which is kind of a hilarious concept when you think about like the actual physiology of what's happening with your body when you build muscle, like that
Yes.
it would somehow last a year after.
Yeah, and the
That's
fact that you're
insane.
gonna have to start over from square one every single year.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of science, I think, in that one. Then it kind of branched off into like off season, yes, and then just minimal when you're actually riding the bike throughout the year. And that usually was accompanied with like once you get into race season, you just didn't touch it, you know?
Mhm.
And then it got to the point, I would say, with just like probably a couple years ago, where it started to become more accepted that it was like, no, you should lift all season. Now, I think that the pendulum swung a little bit. And in some cases, I've seen a lot of athletes just like kind of doing a gym routine of like an average person while trying to train on the bike. And I think maybe the pendulum needs to swing back a little bit. With endurance training, obviously we periodize it. Derek, how do you approach that? Or how would you suggest approaching that for a cyclist? Should they be periodizing their strength training? If so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I've noticed has been the biggest confusion in cyclist strength training now because as you mentioned, there's been this evolution over the years where now no one's really debating whether or not it's good, but it's like, how do we do this and get all of those benefits that we know are there without it actually interrupting our training program and our really specific goals on the bike?
Mm,
And that's where it becomes this thing. Well, it's like, well, when I strength train, I try and do the thing that's best for building max strength, which is like a 5x5 squat routine, but it's so damaging to my body. It takes a long time to recover. And so there's no way I could do it throughout the season. So I'll do it in half the year. And then when the intensity gets high on the bike and I want to be fresh and taper for races, I'll back off. Well, then it's interrupted with travel and race. And pretty soon you go 6 months and you're in that on off season cycle. Or then someone tries to maintain it throughout the year and just feels like their cycling performance is constantly interrupted from it. And they're not making the progress they really want there. So you have to periodize your strength training. And this is that part of the pendulum that has swung to where you have an endurance coach that is trying their best to learn about strength training. And they are going too far with their own pendulum, being like, okay, what's the thing that's going to recruit the most muscle fibers and limit the risk of increasing muscle mass so we get the best power to weight return on our strength exercise? Okay, it's like the 5x5 squat routine is probably the thing I see used mostly right now. And even though they are right, they are not bringing in the principles that they know to be true for on the bike training as well, which are there's different training zones and stacking them in a particular order leads to your best result. They're jumping straight to the VO2 max work. They're jumping straight to the sprints with a 5x5 squat routine. And although it's super important, there's reasons that you want to periodize your training even throughout the off season. And then when you get to the summer, your maintenance can be a little bit more of a mix of everything to try and just stay a little fresh. But what they have wrong there, in my opinion, is the frequency. One session
mm,
per week is a slippery slope to decline, and just losing your fitness slowly throughout the summer. So I believe that 2 sessions per week should still be that standard. Now, if we have that in mind, let's just say you're going to train 2 times per week for strength training because you have let's say a mid to high riding volume. So let's say you're riding 4+ days per week and you're riding more than 6 hours per week. You're going to want to strength train probably a maximum of 2 days per week so you don't have those interruptions with your riding programs. And that could lead to some double days. I totally am in line with your guys' approach is keep the hard days hard, keep the easy days easy. So if you do need to stack a double day, put your strength training session on a day that has like a shorter duration workout with higher intensity intervals. That tends to work well with people. But once you go into your off-season strength training, if you jump into max strength, it's not that you're not going to build that max strength, but it's going to come at the cost of really how you feel. Your body's going to freak out.
Yes.
And it's funny because there's a lot of push right now. It's like, cyclists over 40, cyclists over 50. As we age, we lose type 2 muscle fibers, which is our explosiveness. And all these things are true. But that person needs even more time to prepare their bodies for putting that type of a load and demand. And I think that this is the thing that I've learned through training people in the general fitness industry is that you have to have this base of periodization so that by the time they get to that, they can respond to it the best and have the less, have the most minimal amount of like negative effects, being stiffness, soreness, fatigue, all those things. So I use an OPT model, optimum performance training model, for my periodization. And there's technically 6 steps, and I've whittled it down to like about 4. And I'm even willing, it's kind of interesting. I'm always experimenting with the general strength conditioning rules versus cycling rules and seeing what we can sort of intermix. But I would recommend that everybody comes into off season and starts with a muscular endurance phase. This is the lower weight, higher reps that some coaches right now think is the worst thing to ever do. But what you're doing is setting the stage to take on more load in the upcoming months. What's also great about doing this is that for you to deload off of your racing season, it's a very natural way to get back into training without overloading your system. So let's just say you want to do 4 weeks at a muscular endurance phase. This would be most movements being over 15 reps, essentially over 12 reps. If you have a unilateral movement, so one leg being one rep range and one being the other, if you get it closer to 12-ish to 15 reps, that's fine. It could be up to 20. It could be up to 100 reps, technically. I wouldn't put anybody through that. That'd be torture. Maybe doing a bear crawl or something on the ground like that. But
that would be brutal. I don't know if anybody's done a bear crawl, but if you're thinking of that right now, think of 100 reps. That would absolutely crush me. So
yeah, and this is a perfect example of a movement that is worthwhile doing, even though it doesn't necessarily directly translate to force on the pedals.
Yeah.
But if you start with a muscular endurance phase, you're in a higher rep range, which means lower weight. You can focus on movements that bring a lot of stability to your body. You can focus on unilateral movements like a single leg Romanian deadlift. You can do single arm movements. You can do a lot of core work and essentially set the stage for you coming into increasing the weight and lowering the reps. Now, at this stage, you'd be better off going to the hypertrophy rep range than straight to max strength, even though hypertrophy, which is essentially building muscle mass, that's also scary for people. But remember, you can go from the 15 rep range to like the 10-ish rep range and increase the weight. But because that total volume is not as high as it would be for a typical muscle building focused program, like the example I mentioned earlier with the bench press, yes, you are in that rep range, but your total volume over the entire week is still so much lower than it would be under a normal program, like a general strength and fitness program, that you're preparing your body, you're potentially building muscle, but not to any extreme. So that you sit there for another month, you go to more compound type movements and lifts, bench press, squat, deadlifts. So then by the time you go the next month to your maximum strength phase, when you're doing a 5x5 back squat, well, you just did a 4x10 and your body's much more prepared for it. So then you can handle it and actually adapt to it without having some crazy interruption due to fatigue or soreness or stiffness, or even worse, jumping in too far too soon and just being like, you know what, this is not for me. So you have to chip away at it. And this is the periodization of working up to max strength. And really from there, the next step is including velocity. and that's power. So after your max strength, you've recruited as many muscle fibers as you can. You start sprinkling in some power movements in the following phase. You can keep the rep scheme pretty similar and just add some speed work on top of the heavy strength. And that is a example of 4-month periodization you could do with your strength to get the most out of your off the bike training.
This is the same principles apply when we took, because it's all about how the body grows and how the body builds muscle, adapts, becomes more capable. We as humans have this crazy superpower called supercompensation, and progressive overload is the concept that we give it progressively more load than it can currently handle, but we do so in a measured dose, and then our body supercompensates, adapts to that, and then that allows us to progressively overload more and more and more as we increase the amount. And that's not just with spinning pedals on a bike, that's with just how our body grows in general. So there's so much logic behind that whole thing. I think that for so long, you guys have just been trying to tell everybody just consider just consider strength training, please.
Yeah,
Like, think of doing it. So it's grateful. Like, we're all grateful that anybody does any, but at the same time, there's levels to this, and if you can get more detailed with how you do it, it's only going to get better. That doesn't mean that you have to lift more weight inherently. It doesn't mean that you have to become a bodybuilder. That's not it. It just means that it can support your cycling better. So
it's true.
this is Derek. I kind of want to go through one of the things in the study that I found interesting was the you mentioned rep count a little bit earlier, and there's always this trade-off where a lot of cyclists feel like, oh, the last thing I want to do is do like a 1 rep max, because that's just going to make me huge and it's going to give me huge muscles and I'll weigh a bunch. Again, if only we were so lucky to make that actually happen. But in reality, we usually end up doing a lot of reps and a lot less weight, or at least that's what you hear generally. But this study actually contradicts that. This study showed that athletes did under 6 reps. So they were doing, I would assume that they were doing higher weight than they would do if they were doing 6 to 30 reps, like this other bracket they have. But for under 6 reps, athletes are doing 69% of men and 61% of women. That's what their strength training looked like. Like, they were doing sets that were under 6. And then when you look at sets that were somewhere between 6 to 30, which is a gigantic range, but just the same, something that's longer than that, they had 32% of men doing longer sets like that, or more higher rep count sets, and 56% of women doing that. So good job on the women, I guess. Again, Mike, doing great there. But this is, maybe like you said, Derek, it's because 5x5 is so common, and that's what people are getting prescribed, and maybe they just have like very rudimentary strength training that's being prescribed to them. But what do you think when you see that? You've just broken down that you might want to start with higher rep counts and lower weight as you start off, but then it sounds like you shouldn't pick either or. You should build up for it.
Yeah, exactly. What they're doing is it's exactly right for building the maximum force production you can with your available muscle that you have. So you're essentially putting so much stimulus on your neuromuscular system that it is grabbing every motor unit it can to move this weight. And so it's a really great thing for you to do to create your maximum strength. So 6 or under, 5 or under reps, absolutely necessary at some point in your training for high force production. But this is where I think that the communication is off and the education is off for people prescribing it, is that they're jumping straight to that without the muscular endurance and hypertrophy phase before it, at least as far as your rep scheme goes. So they're not doing anything wrong, but I think that this is where the education comes in, is that, okay, yes, this is that thing on the very pointy end that is going to do the most to return that force production you want, but you can't just jump there. The same way you start day one TrainerRoad and you're like, okay, I want this FTP number to go up. You don't just jump into like VO2 max without including your base rides and your sweet spot and all like these things working up to it. And so that's the same mentality I think that you're seeing. So I wouldn't change the fact that you should do less than 6 reps. It's just when you should do it. Work your way up to it. Like you said, as the reps come down, the weight should go up. There should be a correlation there. And so it's not just doing 6 reps at a low intensity is going to give you good return. The idea is you still have an RPE of 8 for the working set, but now you accomplish that in 6 reps instead of 20.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, there's the inverse relationship between weight and then reps, right? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
So one of the things also that I want to talk about here is training the upper body, the core, and the lower body. Because as I mentioned there beforehand, core strength, like doing core work, was one of the most common things. 72% of men did it, 86% of females did it. I I feel like there's a lot of confusion in terms of what makes up a core exercise, an upper body exercise, and a lower body exercise. And then also like kind of like a total body exercise too,
Mhm.
because I'm thinking of something like a Turkish get up, for example. Like that's like you're working everything. There isn't a single part of you like up until your hair. Like everything's worked during something like that. So
Yeah.
uh I think that this is going to make the meat of the rest of this podcast. I want to talk about movements that you think are most valuable. It's probably best for us just to start at upper body. And this is in the context of a cyclist. Which upper body movements are going to be the best ones for cyclists to focus on? Now, before I say this too, I do want to mention the fact that Derek has a service that you can sign up for. You can go to dialedhealth.com and check it out, and you can sign up. You can go to his Instagram page and get a lot of information on all that. And it's going to have all the different things that you can do. And it's going to give you a lot of stuff that you can focus on. So that is there. But for all of us listening to this, I think it's really helpful just to talk about these exercises. So, Derek, back to it again. Let's start with upper body. Which upper body movements are most relevant to a cyclist when they want to strength train?
Well, first of all, thank you for the plug on the programming.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I'm happy you use the word movements because there's a lot of different exercises that accomplish the same movement and train the same muscle groups. For example, a bench press earlier, this is a horizontal pushing motion. Whether it's with a barbell or dumbbells or you're doing a push up with just your body weight, you're still working the same muscle groups. Now, at different times of your program of periodization, those can apply better than others. So that's where having the understanding of load and when you're going to get the most out of these workouts makes sense. But you want to make sure that you, regardless, hit that horizontal pressing motion. Now, because we want to be balanced humans and not just cyclists, and to be honest, a lot of staying out of pain has to do with your joints being in the correct position. If you have muscles, it's your length tension relationship between your muscles. For example, if you are like, okay, I'm on the bike and I'm on the handlebars, so I have this downward force. So I just want to work on my horizontal pressing motion. Well, that is a good thing, and it's going to help how strong you feel holding your upper body on the handlebars. But if you just continue repeating that motion, what's going to happen over time is that these muscles are potentially going to get stronger and tighter and start pulling your shoulder out of the position that it should be. And now you have a shoulder impingement and you have so much pain that just holding yourself on the handlebars hurts. So there are these counter workouts that you want to do to make sure that we keep your joints in the ideal position. Because once you have those length tension relationships throughout your body the way that they should be, now you're in a position to be as comfortable for as long as possible on the bike. So even though you don't necessarily do a overhead pull, doing a pull up makes a lot of sense for cyclists because it keeps the shoulder happy and healthy and it
Mhm.
keeps the body balanced. So I program all of my programs based on the 7 effective movements. And this has really allowed me to control the overall volume of programs so that you don't get to a point where you're building too much muscle or just bringing on too much fatigue, but that your body stays balanced in your strength training workouts and it still works enough of the muscles you're using on the bike that you can feel the benefits. So for the upper body, you're going to want to do some type of horizontal push and some type of horizontal pull. You're also going to want
Mm.
to do some type of vertical push and some type of vertical pull. And so just think if your arms going out and back, you want to train those motions loaded in both directions. And same thing with overhead pull. Now, there's all sorts of variety that we could talk about in depth, but that's where the programming is actually really nice to have. And it's why I'm so grateful
Mhm.
to even have the product that I do because I want to focus on making sense of all that and knowing that there's 1,000 exercises we could do for your upper body, but these 8 are going to be perfect for you for the next 4 months. That's my job.
Yeah.
And that's why the programs are built the way that they are.
Can I share a practical example of how I could mess that up if I was going about it myself?
Yeah.
So, a good example of that. So, the balance between push and pull, for example, uh, I could do something that's going to be like push ups and then I could also be doing something that's like 7 different variants of push-ups. And all the same time, I'm never doing any sort of row at all. And when I look at it, I'm not thinking of it from that perspective. I'm just like, this is a really good upper body day. Like a good example is like doing pull-ups nonstop, but never doing an overhead press of any kind, right?
Mhm.
And you can do, like you said, there's tons of different ways you could do some sort of overhead movement, but it's really easy to get to the point where you've stacked your strength training and you're just working in that single like you aren't balanced. Like you said, you aren't pushing and pulling or doing something that's countering the other side of it. And that's what allows like proper posture, right? Like that's going to allow
Yeah.
you to sit on the bike, be comfortable, and be stable in that position on the bike the whole time. Um,
Yeah.
is
Do you
there
mind if
any?
I jump in
Yes,
there real
please.
quick just to show you another
Yeah.
example? If you were somebody that came to me in person, like I'm in my training studio now, I train people early in the mornings in person, and I love it. Like, I it's great to have the hands-on, and it really helps a lot develop the online programs, but you see the needs of people coming in where you're like, "Okay, you don't have shoulder pain, but you do have upper cross syndrome. Your shoulders are rounded forward, your thoracic spine is kinda crunched over, your neck and
Hmm.
your chin are jutting forward, and why is this the case? Oh, well, you ride a bike 8 hours a week. You have a desk job you are at home working on this, that, and the other with the family. And so it just happens. You get into this position. Well, a lot of trainers will use a 2-to-1 protocol to correct this type of thing where, okay, we are
Hmm.
going to still do a chest press motion, but our goal is to start getting your posture fixed and to pull your shoulders back. So for this person, let's just say performance aside, and we're just focusing on their posture, it would make sense for me to do twice the amount of rows that I would presses, at least from a
Hmm.
forward position, to strengthen those muscles to naturally hold the shoulders back. And we might even implement more stretching on the front side of the body so that this person will now sit in the proper position without forcing it. And that's kind of what it takes to correct that. So from a general health and wellness perspective, that would be an approach. And to be honest, a lot of cyclists could benefit from it as well. But again, even in that example, you aren't not doing push-ups anymore or some
Mm.
type you just have to it's not cutting it out, it's just reducing it. Like, that's and that goes for what we can talk about with the year-round programming. This should not be the on or off switch. You got to approach all of this like a dial. It's dial it up, dial it down. That is what you're doing. No more on and off switches.
This is yeah, the switches versus faders thing is a thing we constantly reinforce in training, right? To avoid those extremist approaches. This is which, by the way, if you're listening to this and you checked your posture a few times during that
I
last little
did
bit,
it too.
yeah, well, I think we all did. So give this podcast a like if you did. That's a good way for me to make sure you do it. Share it with your friends. That's super helpful. This is so when we talk about this, you want to make sure you have a push and a pull. Um, I think that this kind of gets into a topic we maybe should have covered earlier. And I just want to get into the equipment versus no equipment.
Mm,
I use Dialed Health. I pay for Dialed Health. This isn't sponsored. And something that I find within there is there's this no equipment core workout routine, and there's a various different also ones that you can do that don't require equipment. And honestly, like they are very productive. I don't mean productive just in the sense that they like blow me up, which if I haven't done strength training for a long time and I just jump right in, and if I try to match the reps that I see Derek doing on screen, then it does blow me up. But if I work my way into it gradually, then they don't. But I'm thinking of 2022, I think I had a year where I was not able to train much on the bike because of the fact that we had a newborn in the home and life was crazy. But I was very diligent on my strength training. Almost all of that was without any sort of weight because I didn't have the ability to just like go off and go and do something at a gym or anything else. So, with that in mind, you'd think that like maybe I wouldn't have like a great year. I was able to, I feel like, get by with way less training volume and still put out very impressive power and like be able to adapt for my training very well. And I really do credit the strength side of things. And it was just body weight. It wasn't
mhm.
me. I had a kettlebell. I bring that in some cases in small stuff, but it's not even a very big one. You know, it's I think it was just like a 10 kilo or a 5 kilo one. So not big. So with that in mind, Derek, where does where does a cyclist draw the line? When should they start incorporating weight into their program, and when should they feel like it's okay to just use body weight?
This really comes down to your long-term consistency and that concept of progressive overload that you mentioned earlier, which is completely relevant. To keep getting the adaptation that you want, which is more strength, you have to overload the system either with volume or intensity, to say it as simply as possible. And so if you are only doing body weight exercises, it can be really great for a period of time. And it can also be great, even if you're well trained, again, for like short blocks, for maintenance. These are things that you can touch on quite a bit. But if you don't have access to any equipment, there's going to be a point where to get the stimulus you want and that progressive overload, because it's just your body weight, now you're having to add reps. Well, now you're having to add
150 push-ups.
dude, I mean, I hope you would get that fit, but
Yeah.
that's the thing is that there's a point where, okay, now you are doing too many reps because the adaptation and the stimulus, you're almost blurring the line too close to what aerobic training is.
Mhm.
And this is like the the fallacy that low cadence work is strength training. It's not even close.
Yeah,
And
imagine going to the squat rack and knocking out like 50 reps in a minute, right?
yeah,
Like, you'd
by
be
the way,
like,
for 3 minutes,
yeah.
what would a typical low cadence protocol be? It would be it's not
Yeah.
1 minute. So,
Yeah.
that's the thing
Yeah.
is that, okay, you would never do that many reps because now what are you doing? You're doing aerobic training essentially. Like, I wanna say Andrew Huberman has a great podcast about endurance rep ranges, and I think technically 100 reps would reach the top of the endurance range, but there's these blurry lines with endurance training where I forget the coach whoever coached the guy who and the gal who won UTMB this year, the ultra
Mhm.
trail
Okay.
race.
Yeah.
They did what he calls a muscular endurance training session where they basically carry like 2 liters on their back, and then they do this, I can't remember the duration, I'm sorry for the fuzziness, but basically they do a hike, run for like 10 minutes, and then they dump the pack at the top and come down unweighted. And he really credits a lot of this to the fatigue resistance that his athletes had throughout this race, and both of them won, but he's calling it muscular endurance training. And it's hard for me because I'm like, is it? Is it not? I think the best thing to remember is that there is a point where the the reps are too high. If you're doing more than 20 reps for any strength training exercise, and again, I have them. There's core workouts, there's times, but, like, when the majority of your program starts looking like that, then you're now just blurring the line too much toward the aerobic training and what you're doing on the bike and to the benefits of something like low cadence training, which again, they're there, but it's just a different thing. So at that point, you're going to want to start to get different types of loading. And I think the biggest thing to be cautious of in the long term of not having weight is that the hardest thing to train without weight is your posterior chain, the entire backside of your body. You can train it, and there's creative ways to do it without weight, but to train your back, to train your glutes, to train your hamstrings, it gets harder and harder as you get stronger. And those are muscle groups that are completely underutilized on the bike, but again, support everything you do on the bike. So I would not hang out with no weight for too long. That's just the honest answer. And it again, it doesn't mean you have to go from no equipment to a full gym access. I have a 3-month program that was with one 30-pound loop band or one kettlebell. Again, it's like you add a 30-pound kettlebell and all of a sudden that progressive overload happens and you have another few months before you need that jump.
Mhm. This is another side of this perhaps too, Derek, on the bone density front as well. I I hesitate to reference a specific study, so I don't want to do the normal 2025 podcast Joe Rogan thing and say studies say, and then just go off and say something. So I'm not going to say studies say. In my reading and my education on strength training and the effects of it, um, I do believe that I have seen improvements in bone density from plyometric style training, which is body weight training. um, However, when you start to see improvements in bone density that are in an observed study driven from strength training, adding weight beyond what your body traditionally carries is where that's going to happen. Now, that doesn't just necessarily mean like you might actually, I don't know, see some bone density increases from a push up because maybe you don't push up all the time, but it's probably going to be very minimal compared to if you are doing that push up where it's actually weight, you have a plate on your back, or if you're doing a bench press and you're actually lifting it. Um, and this kind of gets to the point like what you talked about. This is why we see people wearing weighted vests. This is why we see people just increasing weight in general, because that's their body is suddenly the infrastructure of their body has to carry more weight and it has to be more robust as a result. I think that's a very, very worthwhile consideration for athletes to add actual weight to it because of two reasons. Number one, we have like one of the least load bearing exercises you can do aside from swimming, like us on a bike. We're floated, we're
Yeah.
suspending, and we're just pedaling along. A mountain bike, you even have suspension helping you. There's some hard compressions, but really it's like it's not load bearing. And then if you look at what we do with nutrition, this isn't advocated for, but it's commonly practiced. A lot of us cyclists are undernourished. And this is in general. This isn't saying that you just like don't eat enough protein. This is in general. And as a result, we get into situations where we see effects similar to relative energy deficiency syndrome, like Red S. And if you find yourself in that position, your body gets rid of unnecessary things and costly things. We talked about muscle being one, and bone is another one that's very costly to be able to maintain. So that's why it drops down. It says, let's do a systems check. When was the last time our skeletal structure had to carry a lot of weight? It's been years. And then it's like, cool, then let's be efficient there and let's get rid of some of this bone density that we have because it's really expensive to maintain. So, for these two reasons, cyclists are one of the key candidates for osteoporosis and
Yep.
issues related to a low bone density. So I think that's probably another good example of it too, Derek. Does that mean
It
you
is.
have to be doing massive, like you have to be lifting massive, or can that be accomplished at also this progressive scale we've been talking about?
Well, it can be because progressive overload is completely individual.
Mm.
There is somebody who's never done a push-up that could never start with a weighted vest push-up, and them doing an incline push-up is progressive overload, and so they're working toward that, and I think the level could just be a lot different for different people, and so you don't have to do some insane extreme program to get the benefits of durability and with bone density being one of them. But there are specific strategies. Like you mentioned, if you don't have weight, plyometrics is a great way to accomplish that. You're getting some impact in there, which is huge for bone density. Cyclists, we really don't get that the same way that other endurance, well, runners do, or anyone in typical sports.
Mhm.
And so having some period of time to really focus on that is important. In fact, this is kind of a shameless plug here, but I launched a durability program, which I'm recommending for a lot of people this off season because it includes eccentric loading, which helps with uh, really muscle development, but also tendon and ligament strength. Isometric training, so like a wall sit, a plank, these things, again, for your tendons and ligaments and building that stiffness that you want, or strength is a better way to put it. You have to do some isometric work, or and there's versions of that, yielding and unyielding, overcoming. So you can also do other specific strategies to hit those types of adaptations that you can do it in sort of a maintenance fashion or focus on it on a period of time. But again, it really is different for everybody because like what's heavy to you may not be heavy to someone else and vice versa. But this is again where it's like there's this general idea of like, okay, I can make my bones more dense. I can make my tendons and ligaments stronger, and I can make my body just more robust for an acute impact, or even get the muscular durability that I want on a long ride. And I can get little sprinkles of it or focus on it at one time. But these are all like the reasons that strength training becomes so much more of a priority opposed to just that maximum force production. Because again, it's like the consistency over the long term for you to have a little bit more bone density. And again, how do you quantify whether or not you would have broken a bone from an impact? It's very hard to do, but to be able to bounce off the ground and be like, wow, you know, I am okay and I can train in a day or two once I make sure I'm all good from this, that will ultimately lead to the most force production long term. Like this is
Mm,
sort of a side tangent, but when I hear about Jonas Vingegaard intentionally gaining weight coming into the Tour de France, the performance side of it, I'm sure fuels the majority of it. But I think that what these coaches and these managers and everyone in the cycling industry, if you have money going into an athlete that needs to perform, one of the best insurance policies that you can do for them is get them strength training.
mhm.
That alone is worth the money. Like, even if you got all the durability, but none of the performance, which we know isn't true, it would still be worth it. So the fact that you can get all of this in one, like, I know that not as many people are debating it anymore, but it is very, very refreshing for me after years of trying to drill this message that, 2 years ago, our conversation was, should cyclists strength train? And how
Mhm.
do we do it? Now it's like, okay, we all agree cyclists should strength train, but let's get down to the specifics because now it's sort of being done wrong. And so,
Yeah.
sorry, that is a little bit of a side tangent, but it's very refreshing to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move into the core side of things. I think a lot of people just think of crunches. Uh, but the core extends, first of all, it's more than your abs. It's not just your abs. That's everything. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about it from like a trunk perspective, and that's for you. Can you break that down? The myth of that it's just like crunches and just your abs. What are core exercises that cyclists could do to be able to improve their core strength, that functional area?
Yeah. Well, your abs, it's your rectus abdominis muscles. Those are like the six-pack muscles, kind of on the outer layer that you can or cannot see depending on how much fat you have. And really how much of it is built up, right? Those flex your stomach. That is the motion that they do, and they also help you brace and maintain, uh, like a rigid, strong core under impact. So if you're someone who hits a pothole and sometimes you don't see it coming and you're not braced, that's understandable. But let's say an impact's coming and you hit it and you just crumble on the bike, like the hips kind of turn in and you kind of twist. That has a lot to do with not being able to maintain your trunk or core stability. And doing crunches, doing those flexion exercises, those are very good for building part of your core, but there's a lot more to it. People are now saying trunk because it does encompass that 360 view of everything in your torso, which is a very good thing because the erector muscles that go up your back, the deeper abdominal muscles like your transverse abdominis, these obliques, the things around your rib cage, these all make a huge difference too because we're getting forces from every direction and you're constantly having to stabilize it. And those ab muscles are really only doing kind of one motion, with the exception of bracing. And so when you do a core workout, you want to make sure, I think the simplest way to look at it is you do some front flexion, you do something that has either side flexion or an isometric from the side where you're using those obliques. This could also be twisting. And then you do something to where your back is bending the opposite way, like a Superman on the ground. And so you're actually flexing your spine. And so if you think of it in that, like I have 4 directions I need to work my core: forward, side, and then back, you'll cover most of your bases that way. But I will say there's this added layer to it when you're trying to translate that strength to sport, and that's getting your shoulders and your hips to work with your core at the same time. This is where you'll see it's very common, like a quadruped exercise. People are on their hands and knees and they lift up their right hand and they extend their left leg, and it's working their trunk, but also the stability in their shoulder and their hip, and it's going across their body. One of my new favorite exercises for core is the Copenhagen side plank, where you're on your left elbow and your right leg is on an elevated bench or box, and your left leg's actually off the ground. So now the force and all the weight is being basically transferred across from my right hip and down my right leg
Mm,
all the way through my left shoulder down to my left elbow. And so it's literally crossing your entire body. So it's working your core, but if the hip and shoulder stability aren't there, then you're not going to be able to perform the exercise. Those are super important for getting that core strength to translate to sport in general, but especially on the bike, because think about our points of contact on the bike. You have your feet, of course, on the pedals, but a lot of those adjustments and the stabilizing things you'll do are from the saddle and from the handlebars. And so
Mm.
it's not just your trunk that needs the work, it's also the shoulders and the hips that know how to fire in correlation with your trunk that make it translate to the bike, to make it noticeable. And so I would make sure that your core training does encompass those isolated movements that hit those deep target muscles, but also that you do some more total body exercises like a quadruped, Copenhagen side plank. This could be a bear crawl on the ground. Oh my gosh, we could go on all day about the amount of exercises you could do. A Palloff press from a cable or a band. Uh,
Yeah.
we hopefully can show a video of that, or just have anyone look up what a Palloff press is, where you're standing and pressing a cable out in front of you, the load's coming from the side. These are the movements that make it all make sense, in my opinion.
This is interesting because Tobin Ortenblad on a previous podcast, he had everybody imagine viewing overhead like a drone looking down on you when you're riding your bike. And he said you could draw a rectangle for your points of contact. And that would be your hands would be the front corners of the rectangle and your feet would be the back corners of the rectangle. And since pedals are weird, like it would be kind of offset, right? But he said that whenever you control your bike, particularly on a gravel and a road bike, you're creating a diagonal line from one corner to the other.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, a really good visual for people to understand that often misunderstood concept of counter steering, in the sense that it's more like pressure, and it's like cross pressure or counter pressure from that outside foot to the inside hand, right? Is how you
Yes.
end up controlling your bike going through. And it's really interesting that you mentioned those kind of like pathways of tension and control through your body through those exercises, where it's going from starting on one side and then going through your core over to the other side. And that's absolutely whenever you're handling a bike through a turn. It's like a really interesting
Dude,
connection between the
I
two.
just saw content Tom Pidcock did talking exactly about this. He was talking
Oh,
about
really?
descending a bike. And it's funny because I've always known outside foot pressure is like the most important thing. But I'll be honest, I had never really thought about, let's just say cornering specifically. Okay, you have your outside foot pressure. That makes a lot of sense for getting maximum grip, staying balanced on the bike when you're on the rails of the tire. But I never thought about weighting the inside of the handlebar, essentially. And that's what he was saying. He was like, they asked him, what's your most obscure descending advice? And he said, when cornering, weight the inside handlebar. And so if you think, oh, if I'm making a right turn, I have my left leg, the primary pressure point, but also it's the right hand. So it is crossing the body exactly like you said. And this was a recent finding of mine. I've been doing it descending especially, and it's just a game changer for grip and stability. So
It
I feel like
is.
you just connected the dots for me on that specifically. Because again, it comes down to the exercises where you can say, okay, well, I'm just going to focus on that on the bike. And that's good. That's like doing a drill on the bike, which I think can be very helpful. But oftentimes, when you're trying to get your body and your muscles to work in a way that they haven't before, you have to do it in a controlled environment. So for you to be off of the bike, out of potentially flying off a cliff and dangerous other stimulus is going on, you can sit on a mat that's padded. You got the TrainerRoad podcast going. You got your fresh Lululemon shorts on. Okay. You have the perfect amount of supplements in your body, and you can do your safe exercise and get these muscles to work together like this. And then when you go out on the bike and you put yourself there, it's just happening.
Yeah, it just makes sense. Well, Tom
Yeah.
Pidcock definitely listens to the podcast. He got that from Tobin, zero question in my mind. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Got to give credit where credit's due.
One exercise that I absolutely love, that's a small one, it's a variation of a plank. It's like a plank hip dip. I'm not sure if that's actually the name of it, but I came across it through your programming actually. And it's when you're in like a low plank. So that means a plank, but not on your hands. You're on your elbows. And then what you do is you allow like your hips to rotate over so that one hip touches the ground. Like they rotate over and you dip it down and it touches, then you bring it back up. It's just a small thing. If somebody's listening to this and doesn't have access to a gym or anything else, it's a really functional exercise to be able to like create that tension and control through your body. Windshield wipers is another one that you do in some of your exercise and some of your programming. That's just laying on your back with your legs straight up in the air, and then you let them roll down while you keep your shoulders pinned to the ground. And then you use your core strength to bring those back up. There's like all these little ones that you can do that really engage that core across the side. Like the Palloff press, like you mentioned, is amazing for this sort of stuff
Mhm.
too. But it's a really good concept. It's not just crunches. You really want to think about how to work your core in functional ways that go from left to right or right to left across it, and usually up to down, sort of a thing, or down to up. So good,
Absolutely.
good stuff. Lower body. The biggest issue that I see with a lot of cyclists with lower body is, number one, they think of two exercises, squats and deadlifts, and then they do so much that they get sore on their bike, and then they just think they need to keep doing that much, and eventually they get to the point where it may not be a whole lot, but you step back and look at it, and they're doing, like, they're tempted to stack on the plates, they're exhausting their body, and it doesn't seem like they're actually getting across the whole point of it. So how do you approach lower body training? We talked about the other stuff, and you never once mentioned one rep max. Is that your focus with
No.
lower body, since we always work our legs, or how do you structure this?
Well, 1 rep max is how you would work off of percentages, and there's definitely a reason to do that. I typically don't program that way because, for one, finding your 1 rep max, especially for someone who's not you're not sure if their form is on point, can be there's a lot more risk than reward on that, in my opinion. So, no, I don't use a lot of 1 rep maxes. I use a lot of RPE and rep ranges. But I would say that the biggest rule when it comes to strength training your legs, you guys got to hear me loud and clear on this. This is the number one thing you do not want to do, is a dedicated leg day. The quote unquote leg day. Do not walk into a gym with the only intent on training your legs. If you do that, you will overdo it. And now your potential to have quality rides for the next 3, 4, 5 days is out the window. So you have to keep a lid on it. And it's hard because, as cyclists, most of us really love the feeling of our legs being completely smoked. You want them to be full of blood, that, like, I've been sitting at threshold for 6, 7, 8, 9. Like, you want that feeling, right? It feels
Mhm.
good. It feels like you're doing the work that you're supposed to be doing. And you can get a touch of that in the gym, but you have to keep a lid on it, because if you walk out feeling like your legs are smoked, you are going to be destroyed in the next couple of days. And if you do that without consistent strength training in the weeks prior to it, the DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, will literally keep you from doing anything cool on the bike for, like, probably the next week. And this is a cycle people get into, is where they do a dedicated leg day once a week and you're forever sore, because the principle of supercompensation just shows you basically come back to a baseline and start over every single week. This is why I just don't like training 1 day per week regardless, is to counter that. So, no dedicated leg days. What I would recommend doing is picking 2 to 3 workouts for your legs. And the same way that you have your movement principles for your upper body, which is horizontal push and pull, vertical push and pull, your core is basically one of those essential movements, and it's trying to work in multi-direction. When we go to lower body, you have hip dominant and you have knee dominant. So I would recommend that every session you do 1 hip dominant and 1 knee dominant, or make sure that over the course of a week, you hit 2 hip dominant and 2 knee dominants, or even 1 of each could be enough to make progress for a lot of people. And again, not overdo it and still get the benefits of more strength in your lower body. So a hip dominant movement would be a deadlift, or a squat would be a great example of that. A knee dominant movement would be a unilateral exercise that is focused on knee flexion. Or knee extension. This is like a step up or a Bulgarian split squat. Now, when you do knee dominant movements, those are going to more focus on the muscle groups that you're using to pedal a bike. It's knee extension. You're doing a lot of the emphasis is on your quads, which, again, we do want your quads to get stronger. But if you just drill your quads and you do 4 variations of a knee dominant exercise in one workout, you're not going to be able to pedal. It's like you're not a robot. You have to be able to recover, right? So this is where hip dominant exercises can really play to your favor, because they're not the primary pedal drivers, but for your ability to to control force production, to build up your glutes and your hamstrings so that you're not overworking your quads. And by overworking, I mean if your hamstrings and your glutes aren't supporting your quads in a pedal stroke, again, they're not the primary mover, but if they're not there to support the quads the way that they should, your quads start overworking. And essentially, that little bit of work that your hamstrings were doing is now taken over by your quads, but it's actually too much. And so all of a sudden, your quads get really tight. And then all of a sudden, you start getting patella tendonitis, and you're like, what's going on? And I feel weak. And then the back pain starts to flare up because your glutes are not helping stabilize your trunk. So focusing on hip dominant movements and then really focusing on your posterior chain is a great way for you to build strength that translates to the bike without disrupting the primary groups that you're using pedaling. And so doing a squat and a deadlift is great to do, maybe on separate sessions, just because they're probably going to be the heaviest exercise that you do. To be honest, with my training right now, what I recommend a lot of people is like, okay, you have one heavier focused leg movement per week. This could be barbell step up with like a low box or in a deadlift or a trap bar deadlift. And do them on separate days. And then the same day that you do those heavy movements, like for example, if it's the hip dominant trap bar deadlift, well, I'm also going to do a knee dominant movement that day, but it's going to be a little bit lighter so that you don't double down on the intensity too much. So hip dominant, knee dominant, those are the types of movements that you want to do. And I would do at least one, maybe two per week.
That's super practical and a really good point of advice, probably across your whole body too, in the sense that like you don't want to just hit one area too hard. You want to make sure that you're practicing the principle of moderation across this stuff, and instead going for consistency over time.
Can I add
Derek,
one layer to it?
Please.
If you don't mind.
Please.
And again, this is where your program goes from good to great. It's the details of being like, okay, I have the 7 effective movements. I know core is a priority. I want to periodize my training, but you also need to move in different planes of motion. There's 3 planes of motion, and this is purely from a durability standpoint. Our cycling is in the sagittal plane. It's just like forward basically the entire time. Yes, you turn. Yes, you do this, that, and the other, but our pedal stroke and the muscles we're using, it's primarily going forward. And so for you to make your body as durable as possible, we need to give it those stimuluses that it doesn't get on the bike as well. Like you mentioned for plyometrics and impact and the bone density, but also moving side to side in the frontal plane of motion is going to really help make sure that we're not missing muscle groups in your hips, especially, but also lower down the body. Huge for injury prevention. We also have the transverse plane, which is rotation. And so consider that with your programming, or just use my programs because this is all considered for you. But you want to make sure that you hit the 7 effective movements throughout the week, the 3 different planes of motion, and that it's periodized throughout the year. And again, the goal is to not make it more confusing than it needs to be. But the details of what we talked about today are the difference between somebody being able to strength train year round versus not.
Yeah, this is probably the most common thing that we hear with strength training is that athletes, when they pick it up, they just get so sore and they can't do it. This podcast has been full of great advice on how to make sure that you don't get too sore. I'm going to recap some basics here. It's number 1, to make sure that you're approaching your strength training with a periodization perspective, just as you would with anything else. We know that in your sprints at a criterium on the 4th of July of next year, you know that you're going to have to do 1400 watts. That doesn't just mean that you go out and ride at 1400 watts as often as you can in between now and then. I know that sounds silly, but that's how a lot of us approach strength training. We should flip that script, and instead we should look at it from how do we establish a base of fitness that we can build upon and then get more specific as time goes on. We also talked about the fact that you want to focus on the 7 effective movements. I'll list them on the screen here so then people can see. And then in addition to then, if you listen to the podcast, this is your cue to open it up on Spotify and you can watch it, or on YouTube and you can check it out that way. It's much better. But then in addition to that, it's about making sure that you're experiencing movements across a whole wide range or I should say, you're exercising across different movement patterns with your body. And if you're doing that sort of a thing and kind of checking those boxes, that's when you can get the most out of your strength training. So we all know strength training is important, but this is how to elevate it and lift it up to the next level. Derek, this has been super helpful. Is there anything else
Thank
that
you.
you would want to add to this one? We've covered a ton of ground.
I think the thing to consider is just how you would change through the season to go to maintenance, and essentially keep it to 2 sessions per week. If you reduce the overall intensity and you're going to cycle through periodization again, it's very possible to do it that way, especially between A events. But you're just going to have to, when it makes sense for you to add that little bit of intensity in your strength sessions. So you're like, okay, I don't have a race for 2 months. Like today's a great day to go to really increase the squat intensity. You can make those adjustments. Again, it's just that dial switch throughout the season. So if you go through this off season, you do 4 months of periodized training, the goal isn't to stop after that. The goal is to essentially restart the way that you would with any sort of build phase you would on the bike and move toward the next goal. Don't completely stop. Just use that dial switch throughout the season. And if it means some lighter sessions throughout the year to keep your body primed, more than worth your time. So that's, think the last thing I would want to say in regards to strength training year round. And just want to thank you for having me on the pod, man. It's incredible. I use TrainerRoad to really build my riding fitness to what it's been, and it's just such an awesome product. So very grateful to be on this podcast, talking to the family over here. And yeah, if they want to be able to turn the brain off, go through one of my programs, they can do it. We just changed our platform to Train Heroic, so we have a much better system for everybody with the UI and tracking all the information that they want. So the programs are available through that, and I'm also doing one-on-one coaching now. If they want to reach out directly to me through my email, that's another possibility.
Sweet. Awesome. We'll put that. I'm not going to put your email up there because somebody will probably like pull it and then somehow you'll get emails nonstop about like home loans or something. So, we'll just
You can
have
contact me
people.
through my website.
Exactly. Go through the website, go on Instagram, go follow Dialed Health.
Yeah.
Even if you don't end up using Derek's programs, he's a worthwhile follow because he's always sharing different insights and different things that he's doing, and you can glean a whole lot of information from that. So, I hope this helps all of us become faster cyclists. I know for me, I just kind of ended my very short off season and I'm back into it. And today is a strength training day. I'll be following a workout from Derek. It'll be great. So if you want to get faster, make sure you're implementing strength training in there. TrainerRoad's new models and everything else that we have in place that are guiding your training, they take into account the strength training that you're doing as well. So you can go and do your strength training and know that tomorrow, if you blew your legs up, it understands that you haven't done a leg day in a long time, and it's going to make your workouts easier for you. So go try that. Go get faster. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks, everybody.